In Australia today, there is a lot of self-hatred, guilt and shame that is deeply embedded into the culture like a zeitgeist. Perhaps this is why so many Australians have such admiration for the fabricated and exaggerated pre-colonial Aboriginal culture that is forced down our throats by institutions of education and media.
It's a day that we remember the genocide of our people. It's a day we remember the murders and fucking massacres of my people.
We're sick of the racism in this country, from the federal parliament poison chalice that it is.
Most people of Anglo-Celtic origin in Australia do not even know their own history, as it's often depicted as something evil, where Aboriginal culture is shown to us like the movie Pocahontas. It's a fascination with the unknown, something exciting and exotic.
With her stick, Warra Murrungunji dug waterholes and fashioned great red mountains.
Something that is apparently more important than our own history. The exaltation of Aboriginal cultural knowledge is an omnipresent theme embedded deeply into most of today's media in Australia. This is especially true of stations like SBS, ABC and NITV, which constantly promote fraud, like Bruce Pascoe's Dark Emu. A common gimmick they like to show is an Aboriginal person walking along a path pointing out all of the bush tucker and saying something like, "See, this is our supermarket and pharmacy." But of course, this isn't the reality, even for those in remote settlements on country. If it were true, Aboriginals would be at the helm of horticultural discovery, and there would be no gap that needs to be closed. It's worth pointing out that beyond the remote communities there are outstations consisting of campsites, where the people sojourning there are supplied and maintained by a regular convoy of trucks which deliver food. There is this false notion that pre-colonial times in Australia, prior to the arrival of the Brits, was like a paradise, a utopian balance of harmony and peace, seated by some special connection to the land that you or I could just possibly never comprehend. A deeper esoteric and pantheistic understanding of Mother Nature. But the truth, however, shows a much different picture than what the blue-haired academics of universities wish to paint for us. The truth about the Aboriginal way of life, which I wish to discuss with you in this video, is filled with infanticide, cannibalism, and an ecological disaster which put them on the brink of extinction, and how many of these practices became part of some of the Aboriginal tribes' religious beliefs.
Except the father. He wears no makeup, since he has presumably treated the child with kindness and need have nothing to fear from its spirit. The body of the infant, wrapped in paper bark, is lifted onto the platform, where it will be left to decompose. The biting bag the native holds in his mouth has strong magic power. In it is often kept the dried blood of the deceased.
For anyone who has read into the anthropology and history of Aboriginal Australia, from publications spanning back to the 18th century up to the 21st century, there is a very good chance that you will find an entry on infanticide and cannibalism. These barbaric occurrences seem to have been a common and customary practice of pre-colonial Aboriginal tribes that continued well into the 1950s of the modern era, after British settlement, as noted by many historians and scientists throughout our history. One particular source from the 1950s that's worth citing is from the Tribune newspaper, January the 9th, 1957, which based its report on the research efforts of the Western Australia Parliamentary Committee, who were tasked with assessing the quality of life Aboriginals lived with in remote and rural settlements in Western Australia. According to their report, which was published in this newspaper, quote, "The committee has arrived at the conclusion that the plight of the Aboriginals in the Laverton-Warburton Range area are deplorable to the extreme. The natives lack even the most basic necessities of life. Malnutrition, blindness and disease. Abortion and infanticide and burns and other injuries are commonplace." Unquote. I would like to refer to a portion of an article written by Tony Thomas of the Quadrant magazine back in 2022 on the topic of Aboriginal infanticide and cannibalism. I'll put the full article in the description below for those who want to read into this further. All of the sources and citations that are used are mentioned within the article and can be verified quite easily. Quote, how common was infanticide among pre-contact Aborigines? According to the University of Michigan professor of anthropology, Aram Yengoyan, infanticide was the primary means of population control. In theory, infanticide could have been as high as 40 to 50% of all births, and the population could have survived. In actuality, infanticide rates were lower and probably ranged from 15% to 30% of all births. Unquote. Contemporary European observers of nomadic tribal Aboriginals were in apparent agreement that about 30% of newborn Aboriginal children were routinely killed. According to Samuel Gayson, an early settler of the Flinders Range, writes of the Guyurite tribe of the Coopers Creek area between South Australia and Queensland. About 30% are murdered by their mothers at birth. He gave as the reasons for this that many of the mothers married very young. Their firstborn is considered immature and not worth preserving. And because they do not wish to be at the trouble of rearing them, especially if weakly, indeed all sickly or deformed children are made away with in a fear of becoming a burden to the tribe. Unquote. This is cited by Robert Braun Smith in The Aboriginal of Victoria, Volume 1, London, 1878, pages 51 to 52. Similarly, Reverend George Tappan, a prominent Congregationalist missionary to Aborigines in the Murray Valley, stated that in the early 1860s, 1/3 of infants which were born were put to death. Every child which was born before the one which preceded it could not walk and was destroyed, because the mother was regarded as incapable of carrying two. All deformed children were killed as soon as they were born. Of twins, one and often both were put to death. Cited by James Dawson, IBID, page 52. Most European observers noted that these killings were carried out without the slightest sense of guilt or sadness. They were necessary for survival of the tribe. Apparently most infants were killed by burning them alive. Rederick Frederick August Hagenor, a Moravian missionary in Gippsland, stated that Aboriginal tribes would, quote, bury newborn babies alive in the sand, unquote, which was formerly a common practice. But in many cases, the reality of what occurred was far worse. According to Peter Betteridge, a Scottish-born grazier near Swan Hill, who arrived in 1845 and wrote a posthumously published work on Aborigines found in Ibid, quote, infanticide was often practiced, and meals were made by mothers of their own offspring. This practice is attributed to laziness principally. For if a mother has two children, one 2 years old and the other just born, she is sure to destroy the youngest, unquote. Similarly, William Edward Stanbridge, a founder of Dalesford and a local council member there, gave a similar description of their infanticide customs. Quote, newborn babies are killed by their parents and eaten by them and their children. When such revolting occurrences take place, the previously born child is unable to walk, and the opinion is that, by eating as much as possible of the roasted infant, it will possess the strength of both. Unquote. According to P. Folesh, in the Notes of Aborigines of North Australia, the Transactions of the Royal Society of South Australia, Volume 5, 1882, quote, cannibalism is practiced by all natives north of the coast with whom I have come in contact, with the exception of a very small tribe inhabiting the immediate neighbourhood of Port Essington. The eating of grown-up people, that is, of natives, is, as far as I can ascertain, not practiced. Only children of tender age, up to about 2 years old, are considered fit subjects for food, and if they fall ill, are often strangled by old men, cooked and eaten, and all parts except the head, which is skinned and buried, are considered a delicacy. Unquote. Aboriginal cannibals demonstrated a number of distinctive culinary preferences. It appears they greatly favoured the taste of Chinese people, whom they found and killed in remote areas of the settlement over the apparently saltier taste of Europeans. Quote, Urquhart says his boys always told him the blacks did not like the taste of whites much. They were too salty, but they relished the Chinamen, hundreds of whom were killed while packing provisions across the peninsula to the Palmer River goldfields in Queensland in the days following the Mulligans' discovery of the field. This fact was put down to the salt beef diet of early whites, while the Chinese lived more on rice. Urquhart was called out to hunt up the murderers of the Chinamen living in a lonely hut by the roadside. Following up the blacks, Urquhart came upon them while engaged in the preparation of a meal. He and his troopers dashed into the camp and scattered the natives in all directions. On the fire was a looted pot, and simmering inside it was a Chinaman's foot and some sweet potatoes. Unquote. cited by Hudson Fish, Taming the North, 1933, referring to a period after gold was discovered in 1873. Quote, "The blacks west of Cooktown showed me several of the clay-white ant nest camp ovens, where they roasted the Chinese in the old palmer digging days. On one occasion I was present where 2 Chinese were roasted and cut up, smelling and looking exactly like pork roast." Unquote. Cited by Archibald Meston, courtesy of E.A. Meston, in Cummins and Campbell's Monthly Magazine, December 1936. Cannibalism apparently became part of the religious practice among at least some of the Aborigines. Quote, "In parts of New South Wales, such as Bathurst, Goulburn, the Lachlan or Macquarie, it was customary long ago for the firstborn of every lubra to be eaten by the tribe as part of a religious ceremony. I recollect a blackfellow who had, in compliance with the custom, been thrown when an infant on the fire, but was rescued and brought back by some stock keepers, who happened accidentally to be passing at the time. The marks of the burns were distinctly visible on the man when I saw him, and his story is well known in the locality." Unquote. Cited by R. Bro Smith, The Aborigines of Victoria, Volume 1, 1878. There are so many historical sources I could present, but for the sake of time I will move on. A lot of these historical citations on the topic of Aboriginal cannibalism and infanticide that I have mentioned in this video were published on the Quadrant magazine, so I would like to credit them for their great work in finding all of these mentions in settler logs, encyclopedias, and government archives. So I thought that was worth bringing up. It would have taken me probably years to come up with the same amount of primary citations otherwise. There are literally hundreds of accounts of Aboriginal cannibalism and infanticide dating from the first European settlement in Australia all the way up into the mid-50s, as I have shown so far in this video. All of these historical citations, plus many more, are out there for those to find, but are usually found in the form of book or studies, as so much of this knowledge is being eradicated from the internet and regarded as some form of racism. Anything that detracts from the notions that Aboriginals lived happily and peacefully until the settlers came along will not be broadcasted by the ABC, nor will it be tolerated by the cultural editors of our society, who frown upon the very existence of Australia as a nation. It really shines a light on the fact that these pre-colonial troglodyte tribes in Australia had a culture that was filled with child abuse and suffering. Brutality, murder and incest were just commonplace and customary, and there were plenty of other practices that are worthy of mention that didn't make the cut in this video. There seems to be acknowledgement by both settlers and Aboriginals that the quality of life was so poor that the threat of extinction was a very big possibility prior to settlement. I hope this video has helped give you some insight. Hopefully I haven't spoiled your appetite. Be sure to like this video and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.